Everyone else lowered their heads at the metal detector. She didn't, and that, more than anything she carried, set off the alarm. The courthouse hummed with its own kind of order. Fluorescent lights stretched across the ceiling like surgical incisions, precise, sterile, unforgiving. The air tasted faintly of metal and bleach. Beneath it, the shuffle of shoes and the clipped rhythm of commands formed a quiet symphony of submission. Nia Benton stood still for a moment just past the entrance doors, feeling the chill that slid from the glass and into her spine. The space was wide, too wide, designed to make a person small. It had the emptiness of a confession booth, but without mercy. A guard behind the conveyor belt raised a hand, motioning for her to step forward. His voice carried the bored authority of someone who had repeated the same line so many times it had lost meaning. Next, Nia stepped ahead, her heels striking the floor with measured certainty. The sound traveled. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, a sound that refused to blend in. The man in uniform glanced up, not because she was out of line, but because something about her silence drew attention. "Place your belongings in the bin," he said. She loosened her belt, unlatched the small brass buckle, and laid it atop her bag. The metallic clink echoed, bright and sharp. Her keys followed, then her phone, then the thin silver bracelet she wore on her left wrist. Not jewelry, but a gift from her mother, etched with 3 words. "Stand. Don't kneel." The guard's eyes lingered a second too long on the bracelet before she removed it. Another guard, older, with creases carved deep around his eyes, watched her like a teacher waiting for a mistake. "Step through," he said. Nia moved. Her shoulders were square, her chin level. She did not look down as she passed beneath the arch of steel and sensors. The machine buzzed faintly, not a full alarm, just the low hum of suspicion. The guard lifted his hand. "Back up, ma'am." She stopped, turned slightly, and waited. Her eyes met his. They held steady, not confrontational, but unflinching. "I don't have anything else," she said. Her voice was calm, level, almost gentle, but it carried an undercurrent, a depth that made the words heavier than their tone. He gestured again toward the bins. "Belt off, phone out, shoes if you have to." I already did. The silence that followed was not long, but it was long enough for the air to shift. Other people in line began to look. One woman adjusted her purse. A man coughed and stepped aside as if the sound itself might become contagious. The guard pressed a button on his console, watching a faint light blink red. "Just procedure, ma'am," Nia exhaled slowly through her nose. "It always is." The sentence fell like a weight. He didn't reply. He just nodded toward the arch again. She stepped through once more. This time no sound. The light above flickered green. Permission granted. The older guard gestured toward the table beyond. "You can collect your things." The phrase was functional, but it carried the faintest tremor of something else. Relief, or maybe irritation. She wasn't sure. Nia refastened her belt with quiet precision. Around her the lobby pulsed with bureaucratic life. The rhythmic stamp of a clerk's hand on paper, the mechanical slide of security bins, the buzz of a fluorescent light nearing the end of its bulb life. Everything here seemed to operate by muscle memory, a place that did not think, only enforced. When she looked up, she caught her reflection in the glass barrier that separated the lobby from the corridors beyond. The surface threw her image back in fragments, head, shoulder, badge, frame. It was like being assembled from pieces the building didn't quite believe belonged together. The younger guard tried to fill the silence. "Courtroom." "4B," she said. He nodded as if that explained everything. It didn't. Nia slung her bag over her shoulder and turned toward the hallway. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the rhythm of someone aware she was being watched, and equally aware that she would not perform for it. A man brushed past her, muttering an apology. He walked quickly, head down, eyes lowered, the proper posture for passage. She watched him go, then looked back at the metal detector. It framed the line like a doorway to judgment. Each person who stepped through left something behind. A phone, a belt, a small piece of dignity. The machine's hum continued, steady, indifferent. It was not the sound of danger. It was the sound of obedience, and yet even as Nia walked away, that hum seemed to follow her. A frequency she could feel, not hear, vibrating beneath the floor, beneath her ribs. By the time she reached the elevator, the sound had faded into memory. But its echo remained, She pressed the button for the second floor. The doors slid open with a hiss and she stepped inside. The mirrored interior caught her image again. Same face, same stillness. But in this light, her reflection seemed harder, more defined, as if steel recognized steel. As the elevator rose, she thought about how small moments carry weight. How something as simple as not bowing could disturb a machine built to measure compliance. The floor indicator blinked. 2. The doors opened. The corridor ahead was narrow and bright. Somewhere beyond it, a judge would soon speak of justice. For now, the hum of the lobby was behind her, but the lesson of it lingered. Here, power never shouted. It scanned, it observed, and when you refused to bow, it remembered your name. The line moved the way time did in places like this, unevenly, without urgency, without mercy. It began near the courthouse doors and coiled toward the metal detector like a patient animal. Each step forward was permission earned. Each pause was quiet punishment. People clutched folders, handbags, plastic bags filled with papers. Some whispered to one another. Some prayed. Most simply waited. The sound was constant but subdued. Shoes scuffing tile, the whir of the conveyor belt, the distant crackle of radios. The fluorescent light above washed everything in the same sterile shade of fatigue. Nia Benton stood near the middle of the line. She had been waiting for 20 minutes, though the clock on the far wall seemed immune to movement. The second hand ticked but never gained ground. Ahead of her, a man rehearsed a statement under his breath. I didn't mean to. Pause. I wasn't there. Pause. I tried to stop it. Pause. His voice trembled on every correction. Behind her, a woman whispered into a phone. Tell him I might not be home tonight. If they move the hearing again, I'll just sleep in the car. Nia kept her hands clasped in front of her, the file tucked beneath her arm like a shield. The murmur of the crowd flowed around her, a current of nerves and fear and practiced submission. From the security desk, a laugh broke the monotony. Sharp, male, official. One of the guards leaned back in his chair, something crude muttered under his breath. His partner didn't laugh, but he didn't stop him either. That's when she noticed him. Officer Harlan. He wasn't behind the desk. He was standing a few paces away, near the stanchions that guided the line into its snake-like shape. Broad-shouldered, uniform crisp, the kind of man who filled his space with ease. His badge gleamed under the white light, not from polish, but from the kind of attention it demanded. He wasn't looking at the line in general. He was looking at her. It wasn't the glance of idle observation. It was the look of someone measuring distance, studying posture, searching for a story he hadn't been told but was sure he could guess. Nia met his gaze. It was brief, deliberate, unsmiling, without any attempt at civility, but it landed with weight. Harlan didn't look away. He tilted his chin slightly as if to confirm his authority. His thumb rested on the clip of his holster, casual, but intentional enough that the gesture carried meaning. The line inched forward. A guard barked, "Next!" The sound jolted the air. A woman in front of Nia startled and fumbled her purse. Keys clattered across the floor. She bent to retrieve them, apologizing to no one in particular. The sound of the keys scraping tile filled the silence Harlan left behind. When Nia stepped forward again, she was aware of everything. The echo of her shoes, the shallow breaths of the people around her, the mirrored panel on the wall where the line's reflection shimmered like a living mural. Dozens of faces arranged by order, by waiting, by who would be believed and who would not. The queue was a system in miniature. It rewarded patience, punished disruption, and functioned best when everyone stayed in their place. "Keep it moving," one of the guards said, and they did. A child began to cry near the entrance. A mother hushed him quickly, apologizing before anyone could glare. The sound of his small sob was swallowed by the hum of machinery. Nia adjusted her posture, her shoulders square again. She didn't need to be seen defiant, but she refused to look subdued. The stillness around her deepened. She could feel eyes, not many, just one pair in particular, still trained on her. Harlan had moved closer, under the pretense of adjusting a barrier strap. The stanchion belt clicked softly as he unhooked and reattached it. The sound was like punctuation, a subtle marking of territory. He spoke without looking directly at her. "Long line today." His tone was polite but empty, the kind of politeness that disguised inspection. "Seems that way," she said. You here for a case? I'm here to testify. He nodded once, slow. Testify, he repeated, as though tasting the word. That's brave. She said nothing. He waited, expecting elaboration. When none came, the silence thickened. Harlan's jaw tightened. He was used to people explaining themselves, that nervous scramble to justify being where they were. Nia offered him none of it. The guard at the scanner called again. Next! Nia stepped forward, closing the distance between her and the checkpoint. Behind her, Harlan's voice lowered. Not enough to be intimate, but enough to make her aware of the power that watched her walk away. You people always think the rules don't apply. She stopped, not turning, not reacting. The pause itself was an answer. Then she moved on. The man behind her in line shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to have heard. The queue swallowed her silence, as if absorbing the confrontation into its steady rhythm. The machine ahead beeped once, green, then red, then green again, its pattern indifferent to meaning. By the time she reached the conveyor belt, Harlan had resumed his casual stance, one thumb hooked into his utility belt, eyes scanning the next in line. But the tension he left behind remained, like static clinging to fabric. Remove your items, the clerk instructed again. Belts, watches, phones. Nia laid her things down one by one. She could still feel the officer's gaze somewhere in the periphery, heavy as the ceiling lights. The bin slid forward. The hum of the conveyor was louder now, almost like a mechanical whisper. In it, she heard something she couldn't name. Not words, not thoughts, but a kind of verdict the building itself had already passed. The man ahead of her cleared the detector. The guard waved him through without a word. Her turn. She stepped forward, eyes fixed straight ahead. The line behind her breathing as one body. The metal arch loomed again, a narrow passage pretending to be neutral. She didn't look at Harlan. She didn't need to. His attention was a pulse she could feel against her skin. When she crossed through, the light above blinked green. The officer's reflection in the polished floor was small now, distant. But in the stillness of her chest, she felt something change, not in fear, but in resolve. Behind her, the line continued to move, slow and obedient, each person advancing by inches toward whatever waited beyond. And for a fleeting second, Nia imagined the courthouse as one long queue, a nation of waiting souls, all inching forward under the watch of men who never had to stand in line. The clerk's window was not a window at all, just a square cut into the wall, glass thick enough to distort sound. The world on either side reduced to muffled transaction. The line had thinned by the time Nia reached it. The waiting area behind her was a low hum of shuffling feet, murmured names, and the faint rhythm of a rubber stamp meeting paper. The sound came in steady intervals, precise and indifferent, like the pulse of the building itself. Thud. Pause. Thud. Each stamp carried a small violence, an approval that felt like submission. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with rimless glasses and a small bun wound too tightly, never looked up. She wore her authority lightly but effectively, as if the simple act of withholding eye contact confirmed control. A small desk fan oscillated behind her, moving the edge of a pile of papers but offering no comfort. Next, she said, her voice flat. Half swallowed by the glass, Nia stepped forward. She slid her documents beneath the slot. Subpoena, ID, proof of attendance. The clerk's fingers, pale, thin, ringless, reached out, drew the papers in, and began to scan them with mechanical precision. Name, date, signature. The clerk's lips pursed slightly. Her eyes darted to the photo on Nia's ID, then back to the name. Ms. Benton? Yes. The woman nodded once as though confirming a suspicion. You're here to testify for the state? Yes. Her eyes flicked again to the form. You'll need to fill out the acknowledgement slip. She pointed to a small form already sitting on the counter. The pen attached to it by string was bent, the cord frayed. Nia took it. She began to write. The pen dragged slightly across the paper, its tip dull, ink uneven, every letter an act of minor resistance. Behind her, someone sighed. A sharp, exasperated breath. The sound seemed to echo more loudly than the stamp had. The clerk's head tilted subtly toward it, though she said nothing. Nia continued writing, her name, her address, her signature. When she slid the paper back under the glass, the clerk didn't immediately take it. She finished whatever she was typing first, fingers tapping lightly, rhythmically, deliberately slow. Only after a pause did she extend her hand. The movement was precise, 2 fingers lifting the slip as if it carried something contagious. The woman behind Nia muttered something under her breath. Some people take their time. It was barely audible, but the clerk smiled faintly. The shared understanding was wordless but unmistakable. Nia said nothing. The clerk began to stamp. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact left a faint tremor through the glass. Testimony check-in, the clerk murmured. Room 4B, correct? Yes. Another pause. The woman adjusted her glasses, squinting at the form. It says here your testimony relates to an incident involving law enforcement. That's correct. The clerk's expression didn't change, but the tone did. You'll want to keep your ID handy. 4? Sometimes security asks again upstairs. Just procedure. The phrase carried a familiar weight, the same soft weaponry she'd heard all morning. Just procedure meant, just accept this. Nia nodded once. Of course. The clerk stamped the final page. The sound landed harder this time, the echo sliding down the hallway. Then she reached for a small red sticker and pressed it against the top of Nia's file. Hold on to this, she said. Red means pending verification. Verification of what? The clerk finally looked up. Her eyes were gray, flat. Just verification. There it was again. The elastic bureaucracy of language, rules that could stretch to fit any bias and never tear. Nia took the file, her hand steady. The woman behind her exhaled another impatient sigh, exaggerated this time. The clerk smiled slightly toward the sigh. Next. Nia turned to leave, but the exchange behind her caught in the air. Morning, the white woman said brightly, sliding her papers under the glass. Good morning, the clerk replied, her tone suddenly warmer. What can I do for you today? The difference in inflection was almost imperceptible, but not to Nia. She heard the lightness, the ease, the assumption of belonging. Her steps down the hallway felt heavier than they should have. The file under her arm was stamped. Tagged, accepted, but still marked with suspicion. Every sound she passed carried the rhythm of that stamp. Thud. Pause. Thud. It followed her past the elevators, into the corridor, and even as she paused near a water fountain to steady herself, the building's air conditioning clicked on overhead, a mechanical sigh sweeping through vents. Papers rustled. A copier somewhere began its steady grind. The whole courthouse moved in orchestrated monotony, a bureaucracy that did not speak, yet somehow accused. Nia leaned against the wall for a moment. The red sticker on her file caught the light, small, bright, impossible to ignore. It was a dot of authority, casual and condemning. She ran her thumb over it once, then stopped herself. Smearing it would only make it worse, the mark of interference. Defiance, contamination. So she left it as it was, a clerk's mark. Meaningless on paper, absolute in practice. A door opened down the hall, and a man in a suit hurried past, carrying a box of files. His shoes clicked in clean, confident rhythm. He didn't glance at her. He didn't have to. Nia straightened. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with plaques, cameras, framed mission statements about justice and equality. The irony was almost architectural. She moved forward again, her reflection flickering in the glass of each frame. The courthouse seemed to multiply her image with every step. The woman who waited, the woman who complied, the woman who would not bow. At the far end, a janitor wheeled his cart across her path. He gave her a brief nod, the only human acknowledgement in the entire morning. She nodded back. It was nothing and everything. When she reached the stairwell, she paused once more. From here, she could still faintly hear the thud of the clerk's stamp echoing down the corridor. Regular, unfeeling, final. Each strike seemed to say, "We see you. We file you. We decide what you mean." Nia adjusted the file in her arms, the red sticker glaring like a wound. Then she took the stairs, quietly, deliberately, toward courtroom 4B, carrying with her the sound of that stamp, the symbol of a system that mistook procedure for truth. The waiting room was a square of still air. No windows, no color, no sound that wasn't recycled through vents. The carpet was gray, not silver, not smoke, just gray, the color of exhaustion given form. The chairs were plastic, molded from the same design repeated along every courthouse corridor in the country. Light enough to move, but not to matter. Nia Benton sat in the third chair from the corner, her file balanced on her lap. The red sticker still caught the light when she moved, so she didn't. The clock on the wall ticked with a mechanical patience that bordered on cruelty. Its second hand moved cleanly, precisely, uncaring. Every minute it conquered made the air heavier. Across from her, a young man scrolled his phone, thumb moving fast, eyes wide but unfocused. Two women whispered to each other, their heads bent close. Their voices too soft to carry words, only the hum of shared worry. Somewhere beyond the door marked courtroom 4B. Muffled voices rose and fell, lawyers, witnesses, the judge's even tone like a metronome of control. Every so often, the door opened just wide enough for a burst of sound to escape. The shuffle of papers, a chair scraping, the low cough of authority, before closing again, sealing them all back into silence. The air vent above Nia rattled. A soft metallic vibration that repeated every few seconds, irregular and unresolved. It sounded like something trapped, struggling to keep rhythm. The janitor arrived quietly, pushing a small cart with 2 bins. He moved in measured steps, the squeak of his shoes breaking the room's artificial stillness. He emptied the trash by the door first, candy wrappers, a coffee cup, a crumpled summons, all signs of nervous waiting, compressed into waste. When he reached Nia's corner, he nodded at her, just as he had in the hallway earlier. She returned it, the small gesture of mutual recognition between those who passed unseen. He replaced the liner, tied it tight, and wheeled away. The air vent rattled again. The clock ticked on. Time didn't move here. It accumulated. At the far end of the room, a police officer sat by the water cooler, legs spread, posture loose in the way of men who never feared consequence. His laughter came too easily, too loudly, spilling into the sterile air like spilled oil. The clerk at the reception desk smiled politely each time, but her eyes didn't follow the sound. They stayed on her computer screen, her fingers pressing keys with the rhythm of avoidance. Nia watched. Not openly, not in defiance, but with that quiet alertness that came from years of living under invisible microscopes. She noticed everything. The tilt of the officer's chair, the weight of the badge on his chest, the faint metallic click when he adjusted his belt. He laughed again, louder this time, turning his head toward her without quite looking at her. The sound was an intrusion, a reminder of who owned volume in public spaces. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond. The clock answered for her. Tick, tick, tick. Somewhere behind her, the fluorescent light flickered. A buzz, a pause, then steadiness again. A rhythm too deliberate to be coincidence. Nia shifted slightly in her seat, enough to ease the pressure on her back, not enough to suggest restlessness. The line between patience and defiance was thin here, as thin as the plastic between her and the clerk's window had been downstairs. On the far wall hung a framed mission statement for the courthouse. Words like integrity, fairness, equality printed in gold serif letters over a background of marble pillars. The frame was slightly crooked. No one had noticed. A woman across the room suddenly spoke. "Do you know how long this takes?" she asked the receptionist. The clerk didn't look up. "It takes as long as it takes." The woman sighed, a long, helpless sound, and the air seemed to settle around it like dust. Nia glanced at the clock again. Only 6 minutes had passed. It felt like an hour. The ticking was relentless, indifferent, a heartbeat without a body. Through the door to 4B, footsteps approached. 2 voices murmured, low and official. The knob turned, but the door didn't open all the way. Just enough for one of the voices to say, "Next witness." The room shifted. Everyone looked up, half hopeful, half afraid. The clerk behind the desk scanned the room. "Nia Benton?" Nia stood. The sound of her chair scraping against tile was small but sharp, slicing through the room's fatigue. For a moment, everyone's eyes followed her, not with hostility, but with the weary curiosity reserved for someone about to cross a threshold they had not yet reached. She gathered her file, the red-stickered folder tucked neatly beneath her arm, and moved toward the door. As she passed the officer by the water cooler, he stopped mid-laugh, his grin fading into a small smirk. Just enough acknowledgement to claim a piece of the moment. "Good luck," he said. Too casually, Nia didn't reply. She paused only once, at the doorframe, where the clock's ticking seemed loudest. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting the frame of gold words across the wall. Integrity, fairness, equality. Behind her, the clock ticked again, its sound precise, mechanical, perfect. Then she opened the door and stepped through. The latch clicked shut behind her. The waiting room returned to its equilibrium. A hum of stillness, the sound of nothing happening, the quiet heartbeat of a system that mistook order for justice. The courtroom smelled faintly of old polish and cooled air, the scent of order rehearsed too often. When Nia stepped inside, the hum of the waiting room disappeared. The silence here was heavier, shaped by the presence of law. Rows of benches lined the chamber, polished to a dull sheen that reflected the overhead fluorescence. The judge's bench loomed at the far end like a monument, high, deliberate, untouchable. Between it and the gallery, a wooden barrier stood waist-high, the symbolic border between authority and the observed. At its corner stood Officer Harlan. He was in uniform now, the dark navy pressing against his frame, the silver badge on his chest catching the light with a precision that seemed intentional. It wasn't just metal. It was declaration. The first time Nia had seen him, it was in plain clothes near the security line. Just a man watching too long, eyes sharp beneath a polite mask. Now, dressed in authority, he no longer needed to watch quietly. His gaze met hers across the courtroom, calm, direct, appraising. It wasn't curiosity. It was ownership, the look of someone who believed his glance had consequence. Nia held it. Just long enough for acknowledgement, not long enough for permission. The bailiff at the side motioned her forward. "Fourth row, ma'am." "Please be seated until called," she nodded, stepping past Harlan. His stance didn't shift. Feet planted, arms crossed loosely at the wrists, weight distributed evenly like he'd practiced that posture in mirrors. On his left hand, the gold wedding band flashed beneath the lights. Polished, centered, exact. Authority always came polished. As she passed, he said nothing. But the air bent slightly around him, that quiet gravitational field of uniformed men who know how their silence is read. She sat. Second bench from the front. The wood was cold through the thin fabric of her skirt. On the wall above the judge's bench hung the seal of the state, an eagle carved in bronze, wings spread wide. It gleamed in the same light as Harlan's badge. Two symbols of power, both metal, both untouchable. The court clerk shuffled papers at a side desk. The court reporter adjusted her headset. The defense attorney whispered something to the prosecutor, both pretending their tones were neutral. It was the kind of room where neutrality was the most efficient form of bias. Quiet. "Please," the bailiff at the door announced. "All rise for Judge Whitfield." Everyone stood. Harlan didn't look at the judge. His eyes stayed on the room, scanning, measuring. When the judge entered, he turned his head slightly, a gesture of respect performed more out of ritual than belief. The judge took her seat. "You may be seated." The sound of people sitting was soft but collective, a choreography of obedience. The hearing began. Cases called, names read, motions filed. The words floated above meaning, turning law into language, language into noise. Nia listened without hearing. The real weight in the room wasn't the law's language. It was the posture of those who enforced it. From where she sat, she could see Harlan clearly. His uniform crisp, his expression patient. Every movement was restrained, as if restraint itself was proof of righteousness. At one point, he adjusted his belt, a small habitual motion, and the badge caught the light again. A brief flash across the courtroom wall. The light struck the brass plate at the judge's desk, the rim of the clock, and the seal above. 3 points of reflection, converging like a quiet constellation of control. Nia felt the heat of it on her face, though she knew it was only light. A woman at the far end of the gallery shifted nervously, her papers slipping to the floor. The sound drew every head for a second. Harlan moved, 2 steps, quiet but deliberate, closing the distance in an instant. He stooped to retrieve the papers, handed them back, and offered a brief, practiced smile. "You're fine," he said. The words were courteous. The tone was command. Then he turned back to his place, satisfied. Nia watched him resume his stance, the weight back on both feet, the arms crossed. His gaze swept the benches again, landing on her for a heartbeat longer than necessary. He didn't smile this time. The judge's voice carried faintly over the courtroom microphone. "Next witness, Nia Benton." Her name landed with quiet force. The clerk gestured. Please approach. As Nia stood, Harlan's eyes didn't move from her. She walked forward, the wooden floor muffling her steps. The room was utterly still, except for the soft creak of the bench behind her. When she reached the front, Harlan shifted again, this time closer. His job was to maintain order, to escort, to oversee. He extended his hand toward the witness stand's small gate. Right through here. For a moment, the space between them felt charged. The air dense with something that wasn't yet confrontation, but wasn't peace either. Her eyes fell briefly to his badge. The engraving read Harlan R. Monroe. Beneath it, the county crest, polished bright, a mirror to the ceiling light above. A shield, she thought. Not for protection, but for absolution. She stepped past him, her shoulder inches from his. The faint scent of leather and disinfectant clung to his uniform. When she took her place in the witness chair, Harlan moved back to his post. His presence filled the periphery, the sound of his boots on tile, the faint click of his radio. The judge spoke again. Ms. Benton, please state your full name for the record. She did. Her voice was even, low, deliberate. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Her eyes, steady on the judge, didn't waver. But somewhere in her peripheral vision, Harlan's badge caught the light again. Another brief flash. Another unspoken reminder of where power sat. She began to speak. Her words were measured, careful, each sentence weighed, each pause deliberate. But beneath her calm was the steady pulse of unease. Not fear exactly. The recognition of being seen and doubted at once. The courtroom listened, still and sterile. Pens scratched faintly. The judge nodded in slow intervals, and through it all, she could feel the bailiff's gaze, unwavering, disciplined, patient as a loaded gun waiting for reason. When she paused to sip water, her reflection trembled faintly in the glass. Behind it, through the rippled surface, she could just make out his figure. Unmoved. Watching. She set the cup down. Outside the courthouse, unseen, the afternoon sun was beginning to sink, the light filtering through high windows in narrow gold strips. One strip landed directly on Harlan's badge, turning the silver metal to flame. For an instant, the badge glowed, a holy emblem in a secular cathedral. Then the light shifted, and it went cold again. The judge's gavel tapped once. We'll recess for 10 minutes. Everyone rose. Papers rustled. Voices murmured. Harlan remained where he was, posture perfect, eyes unreadable. Nia sat still for a moment longer, the echo of that glint still caught behind her eyes. She wasn't sure if it had been light or warning. Either way, it would not be the last time it burned. The microphone sat before her like a boundary, small, black, unassuming, but alive with judgment. Every time Nia leaned toward it, she felt its quiet pulse, the faint electric hum that came before sound. She wasn't on trial. But the room was arranged to make her feel as if she were. The defendant, a man in a gray suit, younger than she'd expected, sat at the far end of the table. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind worn by men who have learned that silence is their best defense. Beside him, his attorney shuffled papers, clearing his throat as though preparing to perform civility. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes sharp beneath their frames. Ms. Benton, you may begin. Please answer the questions as clearly as possible. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was steady, but the microphone caught the tremor beneath it. Not fear, but the strain of balance. The same strain that came from being both witness and suspect in the same breath. The defense attorney rose slowly. He was tall, his suit too dark against the pale walls. Ms. Benton, he began, his tone smooth, practiced, heavy with polite skepticism. You claim to have witnessed the incident involving Officer Harlan on March 3rd. Is that correct? I did. From where exactly? From the hallway outside courtroom 2A. He nodded, pretending to make a note, though his pen didn't move. And you're certain it was Officer Harlan? Yes. Not another officer in similar uniform. I know what I saw. A small ripple of movement at the defense table. The defendant shifting slightly, almost a smile. The attorney looked up. That's not quite what I asked, Ms. Benton. Before she could respond, the judge interjected softly. Please answer the question directly. I did, Your Honor, Nia said. It was him. The judge's eyebrow lifted, a small gesture but sharp enough to remind her of hierarchy. "Proceed," the judge said. The microphone crackled faintly. The attorney stepped closer. "You've said the officer in question struck you across the face during a verbal exchange, is that right?" "Yes. And this exchange began after you were told to leave the restricted area?" "Yes. So you were in a restricted area." Nia felt the trap close, simple logic weaponized through tone. "I was directed there by the clerk," she said evenly. "She told me to wait by the door until called." "Yet you were still in a restricted area." The microphone captured the faint shift in her breath. "I followed instructions." He smiled slightly, the courtroom smile of men who win by making words mean less than actions. "Ms. Benton," he continued, "is it possible that Officer Harlan only intended to guide you away? That the contact was accidental?" No. It was deliberate." The word landed flat, without hesitation. The judge's gavel tapped once. "Ms. Benton, please refrain from editorializing. Just answer the questions." The defense attorney nodded toward the bench. "Thank you, Your Honor." The same microphone that had magnified his voice now made hers smaller, thinner, distant. He continued, tone almost kind. "You're not trained in police protocol, are you?" "No. So you can't say for certain what a lawful restraint looks like?" "I can say what being hit feels like." The courtroom's stillness sharpened. The judge shifted in her seat. "Ms. Benton," she said, voice clipped, "you will confine your responses to the questions asked." Nia nodded once. "Understood." Her eyes flicked toward the microphone. It sat still, patient, loyal to whoever held the power of phrasing. Its small red light blinked steadily, recording but not protecting. The defense attorney's pen finally moved, though he wasn't writing anything of substance. It was a gesture, a performance of control. "Tell me," he said, "what exactly did you do after this alleged slap?" "Nothing at first. Nothing." I stood still. He tilted his head. "You didn't retaliate?" "No. Why not?" The room seemed to lean closer. Even Harlan, standing at the back by the courtroom door, turned slightly, his arms folded across his chest. Nia looked at the attorney, then at the judge. "Because I didn't think I had permission to move." A pause. The judge's expression flickered. Not sympathy, not agreement, just discomfort. The defense attorney smiled faintly again. "You mean you were frightened?" "I mean," she said quietly, "that I understood how power works." The microphone carried her words like a whisper through the speakers. Not loud, but inescapable. For the first time, the attorney didn't respond right away. He adjusted his tie instead, glanced at his notes, and changed direction. "Ms. Benton, did you raise your voice at any point?" "No." "Did you use physical force of any kind?" "No." "Did you perhaps," and I asked this carefully, appear agitated? "I appeared like a woman who'd just been hit in a courthouse." The words landed without ornament. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Even the clock at the back of the room seemed to delay its next tick. The judge cleared her throat. "Let's remain factual, Ms. Benton." "Yes, Your Honor." The attorney turned slightly toward the jury box, empty today, but his posture remained the same, as if playing to an audience that wasn't there. "Ms. Benton," he said, "when you say you did nothing, you later mentioned performing a physical maneuver." A throw," Nia said. "Right. You threw the officer. I redirected him." "Redirected?" "Yes." He lunged again. "I reacted." His eyebrows lifted as if amused. "And you're trained in combat?" "I'm trained in defense," he smiled. "So you did fight back?" I defended myself. The microphone hissed faintly, the system struggling to carry her tone without distortion. The judge lifted a hand. "All right, that's enough." "But, Your Honor, I said enough." "We'll address the physical exchange later." The attorney stepped back, obedient on the surface. But his smirk, small, satisfied, lingered. Nia sat still. The microphone light blinked twice, then steadied again. It was an obedient device, recording everything, feeling nothing. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Benton," she said, her tone soft but clipped, "please be concise in your remaining answers." "Yes, Your Honor." The session continued. More questions, more calibrations of tone. Each one pressed her a little smaller, compressing her truth into a shape the court could tolerate. By the time the judge called a recess, Nia's throat felt dry, her pulse uneven. She leaned back, watching the microphone as the clerk reached forward to switch it off. The red light blinked once, then died. The room exhaled with it. the soft scrape of chairs, the muted cough of release. But in the silence that followed, the echo of her words seemed to linger in the air. I understood how power works. And somewhere beyond the bench, Harlan's badge caught the light again, its surface reflecting nothing but the ceiling, authority mirrored back to itself, unchallenged, unquestioned, intact. The courtroom emptied in pieces. First the attorneys, collecting their papers with the exhaustion of men who have already decided how truth should sound. Then the clerk, her heels tapping a rhythm that echoed faintly against the walls. The hum of voices receded down the corridor, leaving behind a silence too deliberate to be peace. Nia remained seated. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers folded neatly, still and precise. It was the posture of someone refusing to tremble. Her file lay closed on the table, the red sticker dull under the fluorescence. The air was too cold. She could hear the low murmur of the ventilation system, the same mechanical breath that had followed her since morning. Even the building seemed to be watching, holding itself in a state of expectation. At the back of the room, a door clicked. Officer Harlan entered, still in uniform, still in command of the space. He moved with that quiet authority unique to men who had never been told to move differently. The weight of his boots, the soft jingle of keys, the whisper of leather, each sound claimed the floor before he did. Nia looked up, not as acknowledgement, but as awareness. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood near the aisle, eyes scanning the benches, as though ensuring everything remained in order. But the way his gaze lingered made it clear what he was really measuring. "You can go now," he said finally, his tone even. "I know," Nia replied. He stepped closer, not enough to be overt, just enough to dissolve the distance that made politeness possible. "You testified well." She didn't answer. "It's rare," he continued, "to see someone that composed. Most people get nervous. Their stories start to shake apart when they talk too long." Nia turned her head slightly, her voice quiet. "Maybe you're not listening to the right people." He smiled, a small, practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "You think you're one of the right ones?" Her hands didn't move. They stayed folded, the way they had through every interruption, every question, every moment designed to test her patience. "I think I'm still here," she said. Harlan shifted his stance. His wedding ring caught the light again, a glint, a flash, then stillness. "You shouldn't take things so personally," he said, lowering his voice. "Courtrooms are mechanical. Everyone's just doing their job." She met his eyes. "And when the job is harm?" He let out a soft laugh, almost gentle. "You make it sound like I hit you on purpose." Her silence was precise. She let it last. Long enough for discomfort to grow roots. Harlan's jaw tightened first. "You don't understand procedure," he said. "Maybe not," she said. "But I understand intention." The air between them shifted. The silence became charged. Not loud, not violent, but alive. Harlan's hand moved slightly, adjusting the strap on his belt. The metal buckle clicked once, sharp in the stillness. He leaned in just enough for his voice to drop. "You should be careful how you talk about officers in a courthouse." Nia's hands unfolded then, slowly. She placed one palm flat on the table, the other still resting on her lap. The movement was small, but the change in energy was unmistakable. "I didn't say anything untrue," she said. "Truth's got rules here," he replied. "Same as anywhere else," she almost smiled. "No," she said softly. "That's what makes this place different. Here it only pretends to." For a second, neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering faintly, the hum filling the space where words might have gone. He took another step forward. The scent of leather and starch hung between them. His voice dropped lower, almost conversational. "You know, people who act calm, they're usually the ones about to lose it." Her eyes didn't move from his. "Then you should probably step back." The line landed without raise or tremor. Just clarity. He didn't move. The seconds that followed were long, elastic. The room seemed to tighten around them. Two figures suspended in a balance, neither was willing to break. In the far corner, the microphone on the judge's bench still blinked red, its light faint but visible. A reminder that surveillance never truly left the room, even after the people did. Nia glanced toward it once, then back to Harlan. "You're still being recorded," she said, He didn't look. It's off. Maybe. His eyes narrowed, but his posture eased half a degree. A small shift, enough to hide in plain sight. You like control, he said. No, she said. I like choice. He let the words sit there as though trying to decide whether they were threat or philosophy. The air vent rattled above them, a brief metallic tremor. The sound broke the standoff, not with resolution but with fatigue. Harlan exhaled. You can leave now, Ms. Benton. She rose slowly, collecting her file from the table. Her fingers brushed against the red sticker, now worn at the edges. She straightened it with her thumb. A small act of order in a place that mistook disorder for control. As she turned toward the door, she felt his gaze follow her. Not just watching, but weighing. The kind of gaze that came from men who didn't yet believe in consequences. At the threshold, she paused. Her reflection wavered faintly in the glass of the door. Officer Monroe, she said quietly, not looking back. He raised an eyebrow. Yes? I told the truth today, he smiled faintly. We'll see. She turned the handle. The fluorescent lights above them hummed again. Long, unbroken, relentless. Nia stepped through the door, the sound of her heels measured and calm. Behind her, the courtroom remained still, the echo of restraint thick in the air. Attention not yet spent. Her hands, once folded, now hung loose at her sides, open, steady, waiting. It was the moment before impact, and somewhere in that stillness the building itself seemed to hold its breath. The corridor was long, too long, the kind of hallway that carried sound as if the walls were eager for it. Fluorescent light flooded the space in cold, perfect rectangles. The air hummed faintly, sterile, institutional. Nia walked steadily, her file clutched against her side. Behind her, the heavy courtroom door shut with a slow hydraulic sigh. Each step she took was deliberate, unhurried, the composure of someone who knew exactly how much was being watched. At the far end, the metal detector stood like a silent sentry, marking the way back to freedom, or at least the exit that passed for it. Her heels struck the tile in even rhythm. Click, pause, click. Behind her, a second rhythm joined, louder, heavier. Officer Harlan. His boots made no effort to soften their sound. Authority didn't whisper. It declared itself in echo. Ms. Benton. Nia didn't stop. I gave my statement. You forgot your pen. I didn't bring one. He laughed, not loudly, but enough to fill the empty corridor. Then you left something else behind. She stopped then, the kind of stillness that isn't surrender but preparation. The fluorescent light reflected on the floor, turning the polished surface into a mirror of the moment. She turned. What do you want, officer? He closed the distance, step by step. His posture carried the weight of a man used to control, not through law but presence. I want you to understand something, he said. You walk into a place like this, you keep your head down. You make it easy. Her eyes didn't flinch. Easy for who? For everyone. The word hung in the air like an unfinished threat. She shifted her file from one hand to the other, steady. I didn't come here to make anyone's job easy. He took one step closer. Too close. The light caught his badge, the edges of the metal glowing white-hot for a moment before dimming again. That attitude, he said quietly. It gets people hurt. And that uniform, she replied, keeps you from seeing who you hurt. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, with the weight of everything that had ever gone unpunished. He exhaled through his nose, slow. You think you're better than this place? No, she said. I just think I don't belong beneath it. Something flickered across his face, irritation, pride, something older. The kind of emotion that didn't need permission to act. He looked at her. The stillness, the eyes that didn't bow, and something in him decided it had to be corrected. The sound came fast, a sharp, flat crack, skin meeting skin, echoing off tile and glass and air. The slap wasn't shouted. It was precise, unthinking, procedural in its violence. For a second, everything froze. Even the hum of the light seemed to stop listening. Nia didn't fall. Her head turned with the force of it, the sound ringing in her ear, but her body stayed upright. Her file slipped from her grasp and scattered papers across the floor, white against the gray tile. A constellation of bureaucracy undone. She didn't move. Harlan stood still, hand half raised, as if the gesture itself had surprised him. The silence after impact stretched thin, then thinner, an elastic thread between them that refused to snap. From the ceiling, a small red light blinked. Once. Twice. The security camera. Unblinking. Recording. Nia turned her head back toward him. Her cheek burned. The heat spread down her neck, her pulse steady but rising. Her eyes met his. And in that gaze, no pleading, no disbelief, there was only recognition. He had crossed the line, and she had been waiting for the moment. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice steady. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The authority that had filled him moments ago seemed suddenly weightless, almost juvenile. The red light blinked again. 3 times now. A witness made of circuitry and silence. Nia exhaled once, long and measured. Then motion, not wild, not desperate, controlled. A rotation of the shoulder, a pivot of the hip. Her hand caught his wrist, redirected his balance, and in one breath, the air shifted. He was airborne for a heartbeat. His weight, his certainty, his authority all suspended together before gravity reclaimed him. The thud of his body against the polished floor was louder than the slap had been. Papers fluttered in the air, then settled like snowfall. For a moment neither moved. Harlan groaned, a sharp intake of disbelief more than pain. Nia stood over him, composed, unshaken. Her breathing steady, her hands open now at her sides. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that the sound of impact hadn't already declared. Above them, the camera's red light blinked one last time before turning to a solid glow. Recording, certain, impartial. Down the hall, the echo of footsteps began, the rhythm of witnesses approaching too late. Nia looked up at the lens. For an instant her reflection merged with the metal frame, the image of a woman and a system, both unblinking. Then she bent down, collected her papers one by one, and stacked them neatly again. Her movements were calm, deliberate, the same way she had entered this building. When she rose, the sound of approaching officers filled the corridor. Behind her, Harlan was still on the floor, his hand pressed against the tile, his pride trying to catch its breath. The light above continued to hum, steady, indifferent. It would tell the truth, perhaps, or not. That was never the question. The question was what the truth would cost, and as Nia stood there, illuminated in that cold white light, the world seemed to pause once more, at the edge between consequence and memory, where silence decided what to keep. The instant after the slap stretched like glass before it shatters, perfect, brittle, silent. Nia's face was still turned from the force of it. The sting radiated through her cheek, pulsing against the bone, but her body did not collapse into the posture expected of her. She stayed upright, breathing measured, eyes forward. The corridor's hum returned first, the mechanical whisper of light and air. Then the faint metallic click of Harlan's boot shifting weight, uncertain now, as if realizing the act had exceeded even his own instinct. He waited for her reaction. Fear, outrage, collapse, anything to complete the ritual of submission. But Nia didn't give him that. She exhaled slowly. The air left her lungs like a decision. When she turned to face him, her movements were exact, unhurried. She didn't reach for her cheek, didn't step back. The look in her eyes wasn't rage. It was calculation, born of years knowing what fury costs a black woman in a white institution. Harlan's expression faltered, half defiance, half recognition that he had already gone too far. His mouth opened slightly, as though to speak some justification that would sound procedural, official, safe. He never found the words, because in that pause, that fragile sliver of indecision, she moved. It was not wild or flailing, not the chaos of instinct. It was something older, quieter, a memory of form and balance. Her hand caught his wrist, the same hand that had folded in restraint all morning. The motion was smooth, a rotation of joint, a redirection of force rather than resistance. His body, trained in dominance, didn't understand surrender. It leaned into the push, expecting control, and in that miscalculation, the throw found its opening. The world inverted. For an instant, his boots left the ground. The sound of his breath caught mid-word. His badge flashed once, the metal catching light like a tiny false sun, Then, impact. His body hit the tile with a single pure sound. No clutter, no echo, just a thud, dense and final. Gasps broke through the silence. Voices from the gallery outside, where the doors had remained ajar. A clerk stood frozen mid-step, eyes wide, papers half-fanned like wings. The rhythm of the courthouse broke its own rules for one stunned heartbeat. Harlan's hand scraped against the floor, searching for grounding. His eyes went glassy with disbelief. Not pain yet, just shock. The authority that had filled the room seconds ago drained out of him, leaving only the sound of his own breath. Nia stepped back one pace. Her stance was poised, weight-centered, ready without tension. Her movements were disciplined, not defensive, as if she had simply corrected an imbalance in the air. Her voice, when it came, was low and exact. "Don't touch me again." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The corridor absorbed the words like a verdict. Harlan tried to sit up, a grunt escaping his throat. His ring scraped the floor again, a dull metallic protest. The same hand that had struck her now trembled slightly. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered near the gallery doors. Nia didn't look toward the sound. Her eyes stayed on Harlan. She was breathing evenly, the pulse in her neck visible but steady. The discipline that had held her all day hadn't broken. It had simply changed shape. Behind her, the red light on the ceiling camera blinked again, once, twice, then steady, recording, witnessing, judging nothing. Harlan's jaw tightened. He started to speak, but the words stumbled out as noise, stripped of command. You attacked an officer." Nia's gaze cut through the accusation before it found breath. "I defended myself." The words landed harder than the throw had. Around them, sound returned in fragments. The shuffle of shoes, the gasp of a clerk, the first radio crackle of backup being called. But the center of the moment remained still, a circle of clarity carved in the chaos. Harlan pushed himself up to one knee. His face flushed red, not from pain but humiliation. He reached for his belt instinctively, then stopped, remembering the blinking light above. His eyes met hers again, but this time they didn't hold power. They held warning, fear, the dawning awareness that the narrative might not be his to write anymore. Nia straightened her shoulders. Her cheek still burned where his hand had landed, but beneath the pain was something else, a quiet physical certainty that her body had remembered its dignity. Her movement had not been rebellion. It had been correction. For the first time, the building itself seemed unsure of its role, its walls, its lights, its cameras all bearing witness to something unscripted. Justice, uninvited, had entered the corridor. Officers arrived moments later, rushing down the hall in controlled panic. Their radios hissed half-words: incident, courtroom corridor, possible assault. When they reached her, Nia had already stepped aside, palms visible, posture calm. The papers she had gathered earlier were still clutched neatly in her left hand. "Ma'am, don't move," one of them said, voice taut with the tension of protocol. "I'm not moving," she replied evenly. Harlan was sitting up now, his back against the wall, breathing hard. One of the officers crouched beside him. "You all right, sir?" He didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on Nia, not hatred now, but something closer to disbelief. The system had never taught him what to do when the story reversed. Nia turned toward the nearest officer. Her tone carried no apology. "You saw what happened on the camera." He hesitated. "We'll review the footage." "Do that." Her words weren't defiant. They were procedural, as calm and precise as anything stamped by a clerk's hand. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain who exactly stood in control of this moment. The red light above them blinked once more. Through the glass at the end of the corridor, daylight spilled faintly, filtered by the courthouse's tinted windows. Dust drifted in the beam like suspended judgment. Nia took one slow breath, the kind meant to steady more than lungs. Then she lowered her eyes briefly, not in submission, but in composure. When she looked up again, her expression was unreadable. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of systems pausing, trying to remember whether dignity had ever been allowed to sound like this. Harlan's voice finally broke the quiet, hoarse and uneven. She threw me," one of the officers nodded. "We saw." The words hung heavy. No one moved to cuff her yet. The weight of the camera above made every gesture tentative. Nia glanced at the blinking red light, then back to Harlan. Her final words were steady, deliberate. Now it's recorded. And for the first time in the courthouse that day, justice was not theoretical. It was visible, measured in motion, and perfectly balanced. The hallway filled like a wound flooding with blood. Uniforms first, blue, black, then gray. Officers drawn by the scent of crisis. Radios crackled, voices overlapped, and the air thickened with the strange discipline of controlled panic. Nia stood in the center of it all. Her papers were gone now, scattered beneath the boots that had arrived to contain her. Her palms faced outward, steady, as if surrender were simply another stance she had mastered. Her breathing had not changed. Her posture hadn't broken, but the silence that had followed the throw was gone, replaced by the sound of the system remembering its language. Hands where I can see them. "They're already there," she said softly. "Turn around." She did, slow enough to make every motion clear, deliberate. The hum of fluorescent light returned overhead. The same sterile music that had underscored the morning. The officer who reached her first hesitated for half a second, long enough for the red recording light above to blink once, as if reminding him that the act was being watched. Then the cold click of metal met her wrists. The handcuffs locked with bureaucratic precision. Polished steel, standard issue, a perfect circle just tight enough to remind her where power rested. Nia exhaled once, low. The cuffs were not unexpected. They were, in a way, inevitable, the system's reflex when confronted by resistance that didn't fit its forms. Officer Harlan was still against the wall. His breathing had steadied, but not his pride. A colleague knelt beside him, murmuring something about medical clearance, but he waved it off. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. He wouldn't look at her, though the weight of her calm seemed to pull at him anyway. "Do you want EMS, sir?" "No," he said. "I want her charged." The words came hard, scraping against his throat. The ranking officer nodded once. "You'll both make statements. Statements. The currency of institutions. Truth flattened into form, motive reduced to checkbox." Two other officers took hold of Nia's arms. Not roughly, but firmly. She let them. Resistance now would only become evidence. Dignity here was not the absence of force. It was how you carried it. As they led her down the corridor, she glanced once more toward the camera. The red light still glowed steady. The machine did not blink, did not look away. Whether it would tell the truth or not no longer mattered, only that it had seen. The crowd that had gathered, clerks, attorneys, onlookers, parted as she passed. Eyes followed her, some wide with shock. Others, the older ones, already calculating how the story would read in reports. The murmurs began before she reached the door. She attacked an officer. He hit her first. "I saw the throw." "Don't say that too loud." Whispers layered like static. At the end of the hall, the courtroom doors reopened. The judge had returned, summoned by the chaos. Robe still on, gavel in hand, she looked not at Nia, but at the disruption, as though disorder itself were the defendant. "What is happening here?" The ranking officer straightened. "An incident, Your Honor. We're containing it." The judge's eyes flicked to Nia briefly, then away again. "In my court?" "Yes, ma'am." "Handle it outside." The gavel struck once, a single hollow sound that echoed through the corridor. For all its ceremony, it was smaller than the slap, smaller than the fall. Nia's eyes lingered on the judge as she passed, on the raised dais, the wood polished smooth by generations of order. The sound of the gavel had once meant law to her. Now it only sounded like distance. The officers guided her toward the holding area. The cuffs pressed against her wrists, the metal warming slowly from her skin. She could feel the faint pulse beneath. Steady, unbroken. She kept her chin level. The hallway around her blurred into repetition. Posters about civic duty, framed portraits of retired judges, the seal of the state embossed on glass. The language of legitimacy, printed and hung on every wall. When they reached the processing room, the air changed again, thicker, colder. A faint chemical scent of disinfectant and coffee gone stale. A clerk behind a plexiglass window began typing before anyone spoke, as if the system already knew the script. "Name?" The officer answered for her. "Nia Benton." The clerk didn't look up. "Charge?" "Assaulting a peace officer." Nia's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "Not yet." The clerk stamped a form. Hard, mechanical, final. The sound landed like punctuation. Thud. It was almost identical to the sound of Harlan hitting the floor. Nia noticed every sound in this building had a twin: slap and stamp, blow and gavel, accusation and report. The rhythm of bureaucracy, mimicking violence with cleaner hands. An officer guided her to a bench. The cuffs bit once, a sharp edge against her wrist. She looked down at them, the polished steel catching the light. For a moment, she saw her own reflection distorted in the curve. Not diminished, just multiplied. Across the room, Harlan entered, now with a slight limp. His uniform still crisp, though his face was flushed. He stood behind a separate desk, flanked by colleagues. Their eyes met for a single moment, not defiant, not pleading. Just acknowledgement. Two people caught in the machinery they both helped sustain. He looked away first. "Miss Benton," the clerk said. "Do you understand the charge against you?" "Yes. Do you wish to make a statement?" She hesitated, not because she lacked words, but because she understood what words became once written in ink. Then, the camera already did. The clerk's typing paused briefly before resuming. "We'll see if it's admissible." Nia smiled faintly, though it never reached her eyes. That's what they always say. A low murmur rippled through the room. Not outrage, just discomfort. The kind that comes when truth brushes too close to familiarity. The cuffs stayed on. Minutes passed. Forms exchanged hands. Radios quieted. Order, as always, began to rebuild itself over the debris of what it couldn't control. When the officers finally led her toward the elevator, the gavel's echo still lingered in her mind. That small sound pretending to be authority. The doors slid shut, sealing her inside the mirrored box. Her reflection faced her, a woman cuffed, calm and upright. The metal around her wrists gleamed beneath the sterile light. Proof of punishment. Proof of what she had survived. As the elevator descended, she closed her eyes. Outside, the courthouse continued. Hearings resumed, clocks ticked. The system rebalanced itself with the efficiency of something that had never been sorry. And somewhere in that machinery, a red light blinked on a looping screen, silent, relentless, waiting to decide whether it had captured defiance or truth. For now, it had captured both. The room was small and cold, the kind of cold that wasn't accidental. It was designed, engineered into the walls, calibrated to discipline the body without a single word spoken. The overhead light was harsh and colorless. It didn't flicker, it glared. Every surface reflected some version of control. Brushed steel, white tile, plexiglass. The hum of a cooling vent filled the silence, constant and low, like the machinery of the state breathing through narrow lungs. Nia sat on a metal stool. Hands cuffed in front now, wrists resting against her knees. Her skin had already molded faint red impressions where the metal had pressed too long. Across from her, an officer adjusted a camera mounted on a stand. The lens was large, black, impersonal. The eye of the system, focused and unblinking. She could see her reflection in it. A faint circular distortion. A woman framed for documentation, not for understanding. "Face forward," the officer said. His tone was mechanical, emptied of contempt, emptied of care. Nia didn't move yet. He cleared his throat. "Face forward, ma'am." Slowly, she raised her chin, eyes finding the lens. The air between them felt thick, not with fear, but with resistance. The officer looked at his clipboard. "You may remove your jacket. It's part of my clothing," she said. His eyes flicked up, uncertain if defiance required escalation. Then he looked back down and checked a box anyway. Fine, the camera adjusted with a quiet whir. He positioned the tripod precisely, aligning invisible grids. The red recording light glowed steady. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, the flash hit before the third count. White light exploded. The world disappeared. When it cleared, she was still staring directly into the lens, eyes open, unflinching. He looked at the screen beside him, where her face appeared pixel by pixel. "Look down for the next one." "No," she said. He blinked. "What?" I said no. "That's procedure." She exhaled softly. So was the slap. The silence after that statement was taut, stretched across the room like wire. He shifted his stance, uncomfortable in his own uniform. Then he typed something into the terminal, the sound of keys sharp and quick. Bureaucratic retreat. "Front view will do," he muttered. Her image reappeared on the screen, stark and precise. Neutral background. Neutral expression. But nothing about it was neutral. The camera, for all its machinery, couldn't flatten what it had captured. Not rage, not submission, but something steadier. A refusal to perform either. Her eyes were level. Her lips pressed, neither tight nor soft. It was the kind of face the system didn't know how to categorize. He printed the image. The machine whined, slow and deliberate. The photograph slid out, glossy, thin, official. He lifted it by the corner, careful not to smudge the ink. Then laid it flat on the desk. The image stared back up at them both. "That'll go on record," he said quietly. As if to remind himself more than her, Nia tilted her head slightly. "Records forget people like me until they need to remember them." He hesitated, then slipped the photo into a manila folder stamped with her name. The stamp's ink was still wet. The impression bled faintly through the paper. She watched him sign the bottom. Officer D. Keller. His handwriting was careful, almost elegant, as though the neatness could absolve the meaning. Turned to the side. "Please," another voice said. A second officer had entered, this one younger, his uniform slightly too large. He carried a clipboard and a sense of procedural righteousness. Keller looked at him, then at her, and shook his head slightly. "We're done here," the younger man frowned. "We need the profile." "Front's enough," Keller said, and the tone ended the conversation. The younger officer left, confused but obedient. The door closed softly behind him. For a moment, the room was silent again. Just her, the camera, and the man adjusting to the weight of what he had just witnessed. He picked up the photo again, glanced at it, and said without looking at her, "You're going viral by morning." Nia's voice was calm. "Then the truth gets an audience." He met her gaze then, and for the first time since she entered the building, someone in uniform looked away first. The hum of the vent grew louder in the silence. He gestured toward the hallway. "They'll take you to holding soon." She rose. The cuffs clinked, small metallic music. As she turned, her eyes landed once more on the lens. The red light was still on, still watching, still recording. She faced it one last time, letting her breath slow until her reflection steadied. Her thoughts were clear, cold. This is how they try to define you, by freezing you into stillness. But she also knew something the camera didn't. Stillness wasn't submission. It was control. The flash had stolen her image, but not her presence. When she stepped out into the hallway, the light shifted, warmer, almost gold from the low afternoon sun spilling through narrow windows. It painted long stripes across the floor, slicing the corridor into alternating bars of light and shadow. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. It never was. At the far end of the hall, she saw her image already appearing on a monitor. Grainy, processed, file number blinking below. A system had claimed her face and stored it. Nia stopped, watched it, and smiled just barely, because even frozen in pixels, the camera had captured something it hadn't meant to. A woman unbowed. A system surprised. She turned away as two officers approached. The cuffs clicked again as they led her onward, footsteps echoing through the corridor. Behind her, on the screen, the image of her face remained, illuminated, still, and impossible to erase. It began as a flicker, a shaky upload, 37 seconds long. The file name was an afterthought, courthouse incident footage MP4. Within an hour, it had crossed platforms, rewritten captions, and been claimed by a dozen anonymous accounts, each one dressing it in a different truth. The opening frame was static, a courthouse corridor under fluorescent light. Then the movement, the soundless slap, the instant reaction, the body hitting the floor. There was no prelude, no context, no sound, just violence captured in perfect digital neutrality. By morning, the video had 500,000 views. By noon, it was news. Comment sections swarmed like colonies. Some demanded her arrest. Some demanded his. Some demanded peace, which in the digital vernacular meant silence. Every few seconds, a new comment appeared, pushing the old ones deeper into oblivion. Uncalled for. Deserved it. Both wrong. Queen energy. Criminal. Context? The system of opinion mimicked the system of law, but faster, hungrier, more certain. In a newsroom downtown, a producer watched the footage on loop. He pressed pause just before the slap, then again just before the throw. Each time, the still image changed the story. In one, Nia's face was unreadable, framed as aggression. In another, her stance was poise, framed as survival. He leaned back. "We'll need both angles," he said. The intern beside him nodded, fingers already moving. "Should we add commentary?" "Not yet," the producer replied. "Let the audience write the first draft." In living rooms, phones glowed like tiny confessionals. Families watched together, but not together. One person saw assault. Another saw rebellion. Words like justice, respect, authority floated through the air like currency exchanged without value. An older man muted the sound. "She could have walked away," he said. His daughter didn't look up. She did, until he didn't let her. The silence that followed was longer than the video itself. The courthouse released a statement by mid-afternoon. "We are aware of an incident involving an officer and a civilian. An internal review is underway." The words were the bureaucratic equivalent of anesthesia: dulling, sterile, reversible. Meanwhile, someone slowed the footage down to half speed. Then quarter. Frame by frame, the moment became anatomy. The slap, the pivot, the throw, every millisecond invited analysis. Was she preparing to strike? Was he defending himself? Was this instinct, training, or intent? The pause button became the new gavel. Where one person froze the moment of impact, another froze the instant before it, as if the truth could be edited by timing. A radio host dissected the event live. "She's clearly trained," he said. "Look at the precision." "Or clearly provoked," said his co-host. "Depends on what you think started it. Maybe it's just reflex. Reflex against what?" "Power." A small silence broadcast coast to coast. Then a commercial for car insurance. By evening, the footage had been subtitled, remixed, rescored. Someone added a beat, turned it into a meme. Someone else looped it endlessly, the slap and the throw replayed like ritual sacrifice. A headline read, "The Courtroom That Lost Control." Another, "Hero or Threat." Woman takes down officer, control, of course, was the point. And the loss of it. The scandal. In a cramped apartment across town, Nia sat alone. The television light blinked against her face in waves of artificial blue. She had not spoken since the booking. Her lawyer had told her to stay off social media, but silence wasn't safety anymore. It was vacancy, a space others rushed to fill with their own versions of her. On the screen, they called her defiant, unstable, heroic, dangerous. The adjectives changed with the network, but in all of them, she was reduced to one frame. The instant before she moved, the slap was his crime. The throw was hers, and everything between them, the seconds, the air, the electricity of restraint, was erased by the play button. A panel convened on a late-night broadcast. 4 experts, 4 tones of certainty. "What matters is proportionality," one said. "What matters is accountability," another replied. "What matters," said the host, "is who started it." None of them mentioned what mattered most, that the system they analyzed was watching itself like a mirror, unable to recognize its own reflection. Online, the footage became a language. GIFs, captions, hashtags. Nia Benton. The throw. Courtroom courage. Salt. Disrespect. Charm, equal force. Each tag drew its own crowd. Each crowd built its own truth. And yet, at the center of all that noise, the video itself remained silent. 37 seconds of impartial observation. It didn't lie. It didn't tell the truth. It just existed, endlessly repeated, endlessly debated. At 2 a.m., someone paused it again. Frame 468, the moment before the throw. Her eyes open, calm, locked on the man before her. The commenter wrote, "Look at her face. That's not rage. That's memory." The comment vanished in minutes, buried under 1,000 more. But for that brief moment, someone had seen her not as symbol or spectacle, but as a person standing between restraint and reaction, between survival and the machine that would name it crime. By dawn, the system had begun to absorb the event. Investigations announced, procedures reviewed, policies revisited. The words recycled themselves into legitimacy. Somewhere, a hand pressed pause again. The screen froze mid-motion. Her body, his uniform, the blurred background of a courtroom that looked like every courtroom. The image was still, but the meaning kept moving. Because what the world didn't understand, what it never did, was that truth wasn't in the footage. It was in what people chose to stop and call truth, and the pause button, glowing faintly blue in 1,000 living rooms, was the new seat of judgment, a democracy of watchers, each believing their moment of stillness could define reality. The law office was quiet except for the sound of a single mechanical clock. Each tick landed like punctuation, deliberate, metallic, final. The blinds were half closed, slicing afternoon light into measured stripes across the conference table. Nia sat at one end, wrists still bruised from the cuffs. Across from her, her lawyer, Marlon Trask, read from a sheet of paper, lips barely moving. His posture was immaculate, his suit uncreased, the kind of man who made silence look expensive. The draft lay between them, a single page of language sharpened to legal precision. Words, like scalpels. Ms. Benton acted in self-defense following an unprovoked physical assault by an on-duty officer. He tapped his pen once. "That's the spine," he said. "We build around it." Nia's voice was low. "You make it sound like reflex," he nodded. "Because it was." "It wasn't just that," she said. Trask looked up, his gaze narrow but not unkind. "Nia, we're not arguing philosophy here. We're arguing survival. The system eats anything that sounds emotional." She leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked, small, defiant sound. "Then make it choke." He almost smiled. "That's not how we win. We win by sounding reasonable." He adjusted the phrasing again, reading aloud. "The actions of my client reflect not aggression, but restraint in the face of clear and documented misconduct." He paused. "Restraint softens it. Documented gives us leverage. It implies evidence even before we show it." Nia stared at the paper. Every word was armor, but none of it felt like her skin. On the far wall, a framed certificate hung slightly crooked. Beneath it, a water cooler hummed, indifferent to justice. The office smelled faintly of toner and coffee, the scent of bureaucracy fighting for morality. Trask continued working through the text, each sentence weighed, measured, stripped of temperature. "We ask the public to withhold judgment until the full context is reviewed. We express deep concern over the officer's failure to de-escalate. We reaffirm faith in due process." The phrases were pristine, neutral, defensible. They could fit any case, any decade. That was their power, and their failure. "Due process," Nia murmured, eyes on the draft. "You believe in that?" Trask didn't answer immediately. "I believe in what can be proven on paper." "That's not the same thing." He looked at her then. Really looked. "No, it's the only thing that works." He slid the paper across to her. "We'll release it tomorrow morning. The timing matters. We let the outrage breathe first, then offer language that feels like order." She read it silently. Each line was a fortress built from restraint. Each comma was a barrier against misunderstanding, but something in her wanted rupture, not safety. Her finger paused over one sentence. "My client remains committed to accountability and transparency." She said, "Change that." "To what?" "To truth." Trask raised an eyebrow. "Truth is a dangerous word. It suggests you already own it." She looked up. "I do," he sighed. "They'll call it arrogance." "They already have." He hesitated, then crossed out accountability and transparency and wrote in neat black ink, "Truth." The line looked smaller now, cleaner, sharper. They sat in silence for a long moment. The clock continued its rhythm, each second a reminder of how time moved differently for those under scrutiny. Trask broke it first. "We'll need to decide how much of your past they can use." "My past?" "They'll dig," he said. "Training records, employment history, anything that says you knew how to throw him that way." Nia exhaled. "They'll make my control look like aggression." "They always do." His tone was calm, almost resigned. She studied him. "You sound like you've done this before." "I have," he said. "Too many times. Did it ever change anything?" He looked at her, then at the draft. "Sometimes the statement isn't meant to change things. It's meant to remind them you're still here." He rose, walked to the printer, and fed the paper through. The machine whirred, mechanical, precise, impersonal. The document emerged, warm to the touch. smelling faintly of ink and ozone. He slid it into a folder labeled Public Response, N. Benton. The title itself was another layer of separation. Person converted to case. Trask straightened his tie.
Tomorrow we release.
Then you say nothing. Let the statement speak. Nia looked out the window. The sun was low, city lights beginning to spark beneath it. Everyone else has already spoken. Exactly why you shouldn't, he said. They've filled the noise. Now we give them quiet. Quiet that sounds like authority. Later, after he left her alone to sign the final copy, she read it once more. The paper was immaculate, the ink dense, the tone calculated. It said everything right. And nothing honest. She stared at the first line again. Ms. Benton acted in self-defense. The truth was simpler. She didn't act. She reacted. To a world that never stopped striking first. Her pen hovered above the signature line. Then she signed anyway, because survival too was a kind of statement. When she left the office, the night air hit her like a baptism, sharp, cleansing, unasked for. Across the street, news vans idled, their lights low, their cameras waiting. Somewhere, a reporter rehearsed her name into a microphone. Smoothing the syllables for broadcast, Nia pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. Behind her, in the lawyer's office window, the press release lay under lamplight. The heading glowed faintly in gold serif letters. Press statement, representation of Nia Benton. Beneath it, the first line waited to be read by the world. Ms. Benton acted in self-defense. A single sentence meant to steady a storm. A sentence as shield. As armor, as the calmest form of war. The meeting wasn't on the schedule. It never was. They called it a debrief, but everyone in uniform knew the real word was damage control. The police union's conference room had no windows, just walls paneled in dark laminate that trapped the smell of coffee and sweat. The overhead bulbs buzzed faintly, the light too bright to be comfortable, too dull to be honest. 12 men sat around the table, sleeves rolled up, voices low. Their uniforms varied slightly, some still crisp from duty, others wrinkled from hours of pacing, but their tone was identical. Weary authority. At the head of the table sat Lieutenant Marks, chairman of the union. His jaw was heavy, his manner slow, each sentence measured like an order that couldn't be questioned. Before him, a mug of black coffee cooled, untouched. To his right sat Officer Harlan, his face a map of purple and yellow bruises. His right eye was swollen, his pride more so. Mark started without ceremony. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't about guilt. This is about optics, a murmur of agreement. Chairs creaked, coffee was poured, spoons clinked. The room smelled of caffeine and complicity. Someone down the table said, "They've already leaked the body cam angle." Marks nodded. "Then we leaked the narrative." He turned his eyes on Harlan. "You tell me first. What happened?" Harlan stared at the coffee cup before him, as if the truth might be floating there in the black swirl. "She disrespected the court. I told her to step back. She wouldn't. I reacted." Marks leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You reacted?" "It was instinct," Harlan said. "Control the situation." "The optics say otherwise," Marks replied. Across the table, Sergeant Keene spoke. "Control looks different when you're the one on the floor, Harlan." A few men chuckled, quickly silenced by Marks's glance. The lieutenant took a slow sip from his mug, grimacing at the taste. "What's done is done. Our job is to make sure the department looks composed, not cornered." He set the mug down, leaving a circular stain on the minutes from last week's meeting. "You're on administrative leave starting tomorrow. Full pay, no statements." Harlan frowned. "That makes me look guilty." "No," Mark said flatly. "It makes you look protected." The table filled with procedural talk. "Draft a statement. Coordinate with the DA's office. Get the union rep on the morning news." Every phrase was antiseptic, stripped of morality. They spoke of perception, public temperature, control of narrative. No one mentioned right or wrong. Keene stirred his coffee and said, "We float that the video's incomplete." Maybe she said something threatening before the camera picked up. Another nodded. "We can push that through a retired chief. Let him speculate on air." Marks grunted approval. "Perfect. Make it sound like objectivity." They laughed quietly. The kind of laughter that came from men confident the rules were bendable, as long as they were the ones bending them. Harlan rubbed the side of his face. "She looked calm," he said. "Even when He stopped himself. When it happened. No fear. None, Keene snorted. Maybe she's used to it. But Marks didn't laugh. He watched Harlan for a moment, then said, "You need to get your head straight. Don't turn her into a symbol. That's what the other side does." "She threw me," Harlan said. "You don't forget something like that." Marks's voice went cold. "You will." They passed around another pot of coffee. Each man poured from it as if the ritual itself absolved them. The mugs were mismatched. Department gifts, old campaigns, chipped porcelain. Each held the same bitter liquid. Marks raised his mug slightly, not as a toast, but as confirmation. "We close ranks. We stay quiet, let the city scream for a few days. Then we offer cooperation, internal review, reform talk, whatever word buys silence." Keene added, "Public will move on." "They always do. Another headline's coming next week." Marks nodded. "Exactly. Our advantage is their attention span." Harlan's hand tightened around his cup. "What if she doesn't move on?" The room stilled. Marks studied him. "Then we outlast her." He leaned back, letting the chair groan beneath his weight. "You think the public cares about truth?" "They care about fatigue. Give them just enough noise, and they'll forget what started it." No one argued. They'd all seen it before. When the meeting ended, men rose in quiet unison, collecting their folders and half-empty mugs. Conversation shifted to schedules, shift changes, sports scores, business as usual. Only Harlan lingered. He stared at the empty chair across from him, where Marks had been. The coffee stain on the table was drying, curling at the edges like a bruise on paper. He reached for his mug, but the liquid had gone cold. He sipped anyway. The bitterness filled his mouth. Behind him, Keene's voice came low. "You're lucky, you know." She could have done worse. Harlan didn't turn. She already did. Keene left without replying. Outside the conference room, the hallway smelled faintly of bleach and dust. The lights flickered overhead, humming like tired nerves. Harlan paused at the door, listening. The muffled clatter of coffee cups, the rustle of papers, the quiet laughter of men deciding what truth would look like by morning. He straightened his collar, adjusted his badge, and walked out. Behind him, the coffee pot still hissed on the warmer, burning what was left of the brew, a dark, bitter smell that filled the back room long after the men were gone. The scent of it would linger, faint but permanent, like guilt disguised as routine. The studio was too cold. They always were. Air-conditioned to neutrality, as if temperature itself could be made objective. Nia sat in the center of the set, a circle of white light enclosing her like a verdict. The chair was sleek, uncomfortable, designed for posture, not rest. Across from her sat the interviewer, a woman in a navy blazer with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. The cameras stared from every angle, their red lights blinking like patient sentinels. The microphone rested between them, slim and matte black, catching the studio's light. The same kind of microphone that had once muted her in court. Now it was hers. The producer's voice crackled from the earpiece. "Live in 3, 2, 1. The interviewer's smile brightened a fraction. "Good evening. Tonight we're joined by Nia Carter, the woman at the center of a national conversation." "Thank you for being here." Nia inclined her head. "Thank you for having me." Her voice was calm even. She had practiced it in the mirror the night before, not rehearsed but measured. Each word had to walk the line between fury and restraint. The interviewer leaned forward slightly. "Let's start with the video. Millions have seen it by now. The moment Officer Harlan struck you, and your response. Some call it an act of defiance. Others call it assault. How do you define it?" A pause. Nia looked at the microphone, its mesh glinting faintly. "I define it as survival," she said. The interviewer's smile didn't falter, but her pen froze mid-note. "Survival," she repeated, the word turning in her mouth like something she hadn't expected to taste. "Could you expand on that?" Nia didn't. "No," she said softly. The silence stretched. Cameras adored silence. It made people lean closer. The interviewer recovered quickly. "You've become a symbol for some. Protesters are carrying your photo. Others say you escalated a situation that could have been resolved peacefully. Do you feel responsible for how people are interpreting your actions?" Nia met her gaze.
Interpretation isn't my responsibility. Then whose is it?
"Whoever's doing the interpreting." Another pause, longer this time. The producer's voice murmured in the interviewer's earpiece, urging her to move on. But she didn't. She wanted the moment to break. Wanted emotion. Nia wouldn't give it. In the control booth, the segment director whispered, "She's stonewalling." Someone else replied, "No, she's controlling the tempo. Look at her posture." And indeed, Nia sat perfectly still. Not rigid, not tense, simply grounded. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers resting lightly against one another. Every stillness was deliberate, every breath paced. The interviewer switched tactics. "There's been speculation about your background. You studied judo for years, is that right?" "Yes." "Would you say your training influenced how you reacted that day?" "Yes." "But you didn't hesitate?" "No." The interviewer smiled wider, but it felt forced now. "So it wasn't self-defense?" Nia tilted her head slightly. "It was self-respect." A murmur moved through the crew. The interviewer recovered again, flipping a page in her notes. "Officer Harlan's supporters say your reaction endangered others in the courtroom. That it showed disregard for authority." Nia's eyes flicked toward the camera, just for a heartbeat. "I think authority shows disregard for itself sometimes." The interviewer blinked, unprepared for the sentence's precision. "That's quite a statement." "It's just an observation." The conversation turned to the public reaction. Protests, statements, donations, outrage. "They've turned you into a movement," the interviewer said. "Do you feel like a leader now?" "I'm not leading anything," Nia said. "I'm standing still. People are the ones moving. Do you support what they're doing?" "I support their right to not be quiet." The interviewer tried to find a fracture, a stumble, something emotional to humanize the story. But Nia's composure was unyielding, not robotic, but deliberate, like a dancer aware of every inch of space around her. The microphone stood between them, no longer an instrument of interrogation, but of balance. Every word Nia let pass through it was a choice. Every silence, a statement louder than speech. During a break, the lights dimmed to half. The interviewer sipped water, glancing toward her producer with raised brows that asked, "What am I supposed to do with her?" Nia sat quietly, eyes closed. She could feel the weight of the microphone on the table. Not heavy, but significant. When the producer counted down again, she opened her eyes. "Calm. Final question," the interviewer said, her voice a little softer now. "If you could say one thing to Officer Harlan, what would it be?" Another pause. Nia looked directly into the lens this time. Her reflection gleamed faintly in the curved glass. "Nothing," she said. "Nothing at all?" Nia shook her head. "I already said what I needed to." "Not with words." The interviewer hesitated. "You mean, the truth doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes it just needs to stand." The red light blinked steadily, recording every breath. When the interview ended, the crew began to pack up. Cables coiled, lights dimmed, the air growing warmer as the artificial chill eased. The interviewer extended a hand. "Thank you, Nia, that was powerful." Nia took it politely, the handshake brief. "Thank you for letting me speak." The interviewer almost laughed. "You didn't say much," Nia smiled faintly. "That's the point." Outside the studio, dusk was settling, the sky pale orange fading into gray. Reporters waited by the curb, cameras poised, voices eager. Nia walked past them without stopping. No comments, no gestures. The microphones stretched toward her like hungry mouths, but she gave them nothing. The silence followed her down the street, not empty, but full. Full of meaning, full of control. Somewhere, screens across the country replayed the interview in loops. Commentators dissected her pauses, her expression, her choice of words. But the image that stayed was simple. Nia, still and composed, the microphone before her like a mirror, reflecting her calm back at the world that once tried to silence her. For the first time, the sound that mattered most was the absence of noise. The chamber was designed for solemnity. High ceilings, wood polished to the color of old blood, flags positioned at mathematically perfect angles. Everything in the room existed to suggest gravity. And yet, as the audience settled, as cameras blinked alive along the back wall, gravity began to feel like performance. Rows of officials filled the dais, the Committee on Public Accountability, as the sign behind them read in serif font, the kind that pretended to have moral weight. Their nameplates gleamed under the recessed lights, letters carved in brass. Chairwoman Ellery, Senator Duval, Representative Mason. 1,000 eyes watched from the gallery. Half the seats were occupied by reporters, the other half by citizens who'd come to witness what justice looked like when televised. At the center of it all sat Nia Benton. She wore no jewelry, no color, just a charcoal suit and stillness. Her hands rested on the table before her, fingertips touching lightly as though she were feeling for the pulse of the room. To her left sat her attorney. To her right, the microphone, same shape, same weight as before, but in this place, it felt heavier. Across the aisle, Officer Harlan sat flanked by counsel, his uniform traded for a gray suit. His face had healed mostly. The bruises were gone, but the stiffness remained, a memory in his posture. He didn't look at her. He hadn't since the day she threw him. The chairwoman's gavel struck once. This hearing is now in session. We are gathered to determine the conduct of Officer Thomas Harlan during the incident of March 21st, as well as the actions taken by Ms. Nia Benton in response. All witnesses have been sworn. A pause followed, not silence, but an intake of breath shared by the entire room. Then came the ritual, the oath. Each witness stood, right hand raised, voices overlapping in solemn monotone. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The words hung in the air, sterile and weightless, like steam rising from a machine. Nia felt the phrase pass through her like something already worn thin by repetition. The system loved oaths because they sounded like morality without requiring any. Ms. Benton, the chairwoman said. You may proceed. Nia adjusted the microphone slightly. Its neck bent toward her, obedient. On the day in question, she began, I entered the courthouse to testify as a witness. Not a defendant, not a suspect, just a woman called to speak. Her voice carried through the room, steady, unhurried. The microphones didn't amplify so much as illuminate, making every syllable clean, every pause deliberate. The officer at the door asked me to remove my belt. I did. He asked me to step back. I did. He told me not to move even after I'd complied. And then he hit me. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. The chairwoman's gavel struck again, one sharp sound, a reminder that decorum would replace outrage here. Nia waited, then continued. I didn't think, she said. My body moved before my mind could. That's what training does. It turns defense into instinct. Her lawyer leaned forward slightly, ready to caution, ready to edit. But Nia didn't stop. I didn't throw him because I'm angry. I threw him because I was tired. Tired of being touched without permission, ordered without cause, doubted without reason, silence. The kind that stretched until the air itself seemed to listen. On the other side of the aisle, Harlan's jaw flexed. His attorney whispered something, but he didn't respond. His gaze stayed locked on the table, the polished wood reflecting the fluorescent light like a thin sheet of ice. The chairwoman asked procedural questions, time, sequence, witnesses. Each answer was another step in a choreography of bureaucracy. But beneath the formality, a current ran, visible in the posture of the audience, in the quiet shifting of feet, in the collective knowledge that this was less about truth and more about how truth would be recorded. When Harlan's turn came, he rose slowly. His voice was low, practiced. I acted in accordance with standard protocol, he said. I perceived a potential threat. My response was to maintain control of the environment. He said it without inflection, without apology. A recital, not a confession. The chairwoman nodded. And when Ms. Benton responded? Harlan hesitated. His throat worked once before he spoke. I lost balance. Were you struck? No, ma'am. Then why did you fall? He hesitated again. She used force. A whisper from the gallery. Skill. Someone murmured, quickly shushed. The chairwoman's pen tapped once against her pad. Did you consider that your initial action, the slap, might constitute excessive force? He glanced at his attorney. I considered it procedural correction. A faint tightening passed through the committee. Even the stenographer paused for half a second before resuming her keys. When the questioning ended, both witnesses were told to remain seated for closing statements. The chairwoman looked out over the room, her expression solemn, her tone composed. This inquiry, she said, is not a trial of character but of conduct. We are here to examine systems, not souls. But Nia heard the lie in that distinction. Systems were built of souls. and those who refused to see that were the ones who kept them alive. She looked around the chamber, the flags, the polished wood, the people pretending to be neutral. She saw how the light caught the brass nameplates, reflecting sharp little glints onto the walls like scattered fragments of truth. The same light touched Harlan's face. He didn't flinch. He just stared ahead, his eyes fixed somewhere above the horizon of accountability. When the gavel fell to adjourn, the crowd erupted into low conversation. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered into microphones. Nia stood slowly. The oath still rang faintly in her ears. The whole truth, nothing but. But as she walked toward the exit, she thought about how easily those words dissolved once the cameras turned off, how they evaporated into the conditioned air of public buildings. At the door, she paused. The clerk who'd once scrutinized her papers now avoided her eyes. The bailiff stood beside the frame, hand resting on his belt, not in threat, just habit. She passed through the threshold without a word. Outside, sunlight hit the marble steps like a benediction she didn't ask for. Reporters shouted her name. Their microphones raised high. Nia kept walking. Behind her, inside the chamber, the oath still lingered, an echo trapped between walls built to contain truth, not free it. The air smelled faintly of polish, paper, and the kind of justice that comes dressed as ceremony. The verdict arrived not in the courtroom, not beneath cameras or oaths, but in a fluorescent-lit conference room on the 12th floor of the Department of Internal Oversight, a room so ordinary it could have belonged to any office, anywhere. The blinds were half drawn. The carpet was gray, patterned in dull squares designed to hide stains. On the long table, a carafe of cold coffee sat untouched beside a tray of dry pastries. This was where justice went to die quietly. 5 officials sat around the table. Their suits were tailored, their expressions practiced neutrality. Each had before them a stack of papers clipped neatly together, the top sheet stamped "Confidential, Review Committee Findings." At the far end sat the chair, a man named Gordon. Lane, who had spent 30 years in administration and spoke with the weary precision of someone who'd learned how to say everything without ever taking a position. He looked at his colleagues. "We're here to finalize the report regarding the Benton-Harlan incident. The draft findings have been circulated." No one spoke. Pages rustled. Pens clicked. Outside, rain tapped against the window. Steady, polite, indifferent. The report was clinical in tone, its language drained of emotion. Officer Thomas Harlan acted within perceived threat parameters. Subject Nia Benton's physical response constituted disproportionate force. Review recommends no further disciplinary action. 3 sentences. 37 words. Enough to close a story that had set a nation on fire. Lane cleared his throat. "All right then. Do we have consensus?" A hand went up. Member Caldwell, the youngest on the board, her voice careful. "Just to confirm, we're defining the slap as procedural correction. That phrasing seems ambiguous." Lane didn't look up from his papers. "Ambiguity protects everyone, Ms. Caldwell, but the footage clearly shows—" He raised a hand, stopping her. "We're not reviewing footage. We're reviewing conduct." A beat of silence. She nodded, eyes lowering back to the page. Across the table, another member, Director Hughes, retired law enforcement, signed his copy with a heavy hand. "This is the right call. We can't set a precedent that every officer's reflex is up for civilian interpretation." Lane nodded. "Exactly. We maintain institutional integrity." The word integrity hung in the air like a scent that had lost its meaning. The stamping began. Each board member, one by one, reached for the rubber seal on the table and pressed it into the blue ink pad. Then, with a small, deliberate motion, each brought it down onto the report. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was soft but final, the bureaucratic equivalent of a gavel strike. When the last stamp landed, the chair looked up. "That concludes the review," someone asked. "Do we release the statement tonight?" "Yes," Lane said. "Public interest will fade faster if we feed them closure before the weekend." The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but no one laughed. They packed their papers into briefcases, adjusted their jackets, and stood. One by one, they left. The room emptied, but the smell of ink remained, sharp, chemical, permanent. Downstairs, in the lobby, the report was already being formatted for press release. A junior communications officer, barely out of college, adjusted phrasing for tone, swapping dismissed for resolved. He sent the document to his supervisor for approval, unaware that in doing so, he'd just helped history tilt 1 degree further off balance. When Nia received the call, she was at home. The apartment was quiet, blinds drawn, TV off. A cup of tea had gone cold beside her on the table. Her lawyer's voice came through the speaker, hesitant. They ruled it justified. Harlan's use of force. They're calling your response excessive. She didn't answer right away. The words drifted into the air, absorbed by the stillness. Her eyes moved to the small stack of mail on the counter. Bills, notices, an envelope from the county with her name typed in block letters. Everything in her life lately had come printed in bureaucratic font. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Of course they did. Her lawyer sighed. We can appeal, file for civil review, maybe federal if we... No, Nia said. They've written their truth. I'll write mine. The line went quiet. At the precinct, Officer Harlan was called into the captain's office. The verdict had already been emailed. A single paragraph. The captain looked up from his desk, expression unreadable. Administrative review cleared you. You're reinstated next week. Keep your head down. Harlan nodded. Yes, sir. The captain hesitated. Public'll move on soon. These things burn out. Harlan forced a faint smile. They always do. But as he turned to leave, the captain added, almost as an afterthought, doesn't mean they forget, though. By evening, news outlets carried the story, board clears officer in courthouse incident. Benton's actions deemed excessive. City calls for healing and unity. Comment sections flooded again, half celebratory, half furious. In living rooms and offices across the city, people debated the meaning of justice in comfortable tones. In the official archives, the stamped E report dried, blue ink seeping into paper fibers, irreversible. Late that night, Nia sat by the window, the city glowing faintly beyond the glass. Rain streaked down in thin lines, tracing paths that caught the reflection of the streetlights below. She opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried through every hearing, every waiting room. On the first blank page, she wrote in neat, deliberate script. They called it justified. I call it remembered. She closed the notebook gently, her hand resting on the cover for a long time. In the department's 12th floor conference room, the lights had been turned off. The stamped report sat stacked on the table, edges aligned, perfect. In the darkness, the faint imprint of the seal, the circle of authority, gleamed when the hallway lights flickered through the blinds. The ink would dry by morning. The decision would stand. The system would sleep well, and somewhere in that quiet, the sound of the stamp still echoed. Soft, efficient, final. The heartbeat of a machine that called itself justice. The morning the silence began, the courthouse looked the same as it always had. Pale stone, glass doors, the flag overhead tugging idly in the wind. But there was something new about the air, dense, deliberate, waiting. Nia arrived just after 8. She wore black. No slogans, no signs, no microphone. Only presence. Her shoes, polished and plain, clicked once on the steps before she stopped. She faced the building, the same building that had stripped her, questioned her, recorded her, judged her. Now, she simply stood. The guards at the entrance exchanged uncertain looks. They recognized her, of course, everyone did. But there was no law against standing. Not yet. The plaza around her filled with the usual rhythm of morning, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of wheels against stone, the hollow laughter of men in suits. But her stillness began to pull at the edges of their motion, like gravity working in reverse. People slowed as they passed. Some turned. Some whispered her name. By 9, a handful of others had joined her. 2 women, 1 man, a teenager with a school backpack slung low on his shoulder. They didn't speak. They simply took their place beside her, aligning themselves in quiet formation, shoes faced forward. Hands still, eyes open. The courthouse loomed before them, its facade gleaming in the late sun like something pretending to be pure. Inside, the morning hearings continued. Metal detectors beeped. Clerks stamped papers. Officer Harlan walked the hallway outside courtroom 3A without looking out the window. But the sound of silence outside began to creep in. Through glass, through air vents, through the subtle shift in how people carried themselves. By noon, the crowd had doubled. Journalists arrived, disappointed by the lack of chance or confrontation. Their cameras lingered uncertainly, searching for motion. Finding none, they began to film the stillness itself. The footage looked strange on screen. Dozens of people standing motionless, their shoes aligned like punctuation, marks at the end of a long sentence. Silent justice began to trend by afternoon. Nia didn't move. She felt the hours pass as changes in light. White, morning thinning into gold. Then dull gray as clouds gathered. A fly landed on her wrist. She didn't brush it away. Someone behind her whispered, "What do we do now?" Nia didn't turn. "We wait." The answer spread quietly through the line, repeated from person to person like a secret. "We wait," and so they did. At 3 p.m., the courthouse doors opened. Lawyers emerged, blinking into the light. Some paused at the top step, unsure whether to pass through the line of silent bodies. One woman, a prosecutor, hesitated, then walked through the center. Her heels echoed unnaturally loud. The silence swallowed the sound whole, leaving only the faint whisper of wind behind her. A reporter called out, breaking the spell. "Ms. Benton, are you leading a protest?" Nia finally turned her head. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "No," she said. "I'm standing. But what message are you trying to send?" "That some things deserve silence." The reporter frowned. "Like what?" Nia looked past her. At the doors, the flag, the rows of cameras now multiplying on the edges of the plaza. Like truth, like grief, like justice when it's tired of talking. By sunset, the crowd had become a small congregation. Teachers, nurses, retired men with folded hands, a mother holding her child, a man in a business suit who removed his shoes and set them neatly beside Nia's, his bare feet on the cold stone. One by one, others followed. Shoes lined the steps, black, brown, worn, new, some still damp from rain, all facing forward. The courthouse guards began to fidget. One of them muttered, "It's getting weird out there." Another said, "They're not breaking any laws, yet." They both laughed softly, but the laughter sounded smaller than before. Night fell without ceremony. Streetlights flickered on. The city's hum continued around them, but the silence on the courthouse steps had taken root. It had weight now, an invisible architecture stronger than stone. People left quietly, one by one, but more arrived to replace them. Some brought candles, some brought nothing but their presence. From above, the courthouse steps looked like a tide, dark figures standing in rows, shoes aligned toward the seat of power. Inside, the janitorial staff worked overtime. Trash bins were emptied. Floors mopped. The building prepared itself for another day of business, as if nothing outside had changed. But when the cleaning crew looked out through the glass doors, they saw faces lit by candlelight, unmoving. A few crossed themselves. Others simply watched. One janitor whispered, "They're not yelling." "It's worse than yelling." Around midnight, Nia remained. A handful still stood with her. The air was cold now, the kind that made breath visible. She closed her eyes briefly. Her body ached, but her stance did not falter. She thought of the metal detector, the courtroom, the stamp on the report. She thought of every word that had been used to contain her. Now, she gave them none. Silence was her counter-argument. Somewhere behind the courthouse, Officer Harlan watched from the parking lot. He hadn't intended to. He'd just come to retrieve his badge from the administrative desk. From where he stood, he could see their shapes in the glow of the street lamps, motionless, facing the building he worked in. He felt a strange unease crawl through him. It wasn't fear. It was exposure. The silence pressed against the windows, and for the first time, he realized it wasn't absence. It was refusal. He turned away, but the sound, or lack of it, followed him. By dawn, the steps were littered with shoes. Hundreds now, rows upon rows of them, facing forward, each pair an unspoken sentence. Reporters filmed the scene from above, describing it as a haunting image of calm defiance. But those who stood there didn't need words to understand. They knew silence could speak in full sentences when nothing else could. Nia left as the sun rose. She didn't announce her departure, didn't call to those around her. She simply stepped down one stair, then another. The sound of her shoes against stone quiet but absolute. The others remained. The shoes on the steps stayed exactly where they were. Still, aligned, facing the building, like a silent court of their own, waiting for the next verdict to arrive. It began as a rumor, a whisper in digital corners, a security firm, a misplaced file, a new angle. Then, one gray morning in March, the footage appeared, uncut, unedited, timestamp blinking in the corner. Cold. Bureaucratic precision, 10:47, 12 a.m. The camera, previously unseen, had been mounted high in the opposite corridor. It caught everything, the slap, the recoil of flesh, the silence that followed, and then the throw. Nia's motion, sharp and controlled, no longer appeared as aggression but as reaction. Defense pure and instinctive. The video spread faster than the first one ever had. No caption needed, no debate required, and yet debate came anyway. In newsrooms, anchors adjusted their tone. Phrases shifted, new evidence suggests. Questions have resurfaced. Was justice premature? The same networks that had dissected her expression now parsed their own apologies into soft, digestible fragments. The clip played on loop, and with each replay, the myth of her guilt thinned. Still, the tone of coverage remained cautious. Vindication spoken in passive voice. The timestamp glowed in every frame like a wound reopening. 10:47:12, the moment the world had chosen not to see. Nia watched it once, only once. In the dim light of her apartment, the video flickered across her screen, her own face reflected faintly in the glass. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply sat there, breathing evenly, watching truth arrive months too late. Her lawyer called 30 minutes later. We're filing for dismissal of the charges. The DA's office has no choice. Nia nodded, though he couldn't see her. No choice, she repeated softly, as if testing the words for weight. Outside, rain began to fall, thin, steady lines tracing the glass. It sounded like static, like the white noise of bureaucracy collapsing one apology at a time. The courthouse looked different now. Reporters no longer waited by the steps. The silence protest had ended weeks ago, but the shoes still sat under plastic tarps, weathered and darkened by time. Nia walked past them on her way to the hearing. Each pair seemed heavier than before, soaked with the patience of the months that had passed. Inside, the same hallways greeted her. Same light, same hum, same smell of disinfectant and recycled air. Only the eyes that watched her were different now. Not hostile, not yet kind, just cautious. The courtroom itself was nearly empty. Judge, clerk, counsel, no audience. No spectacle. When the judge spoke, his voice was dry. In light of the newly surfaced evidence, the charges against Ms. Benton are hereby dismissed. The gavel fell, once, hollow. Procedural. A sound meant to restore balance, but echoing through a space already unbalanced beyond repair. Nia didn't bow, didn't thank him. She just stood still until the judge looked away first. Outside, a reporter caught her at the doors. Ms. Benton, how does it feel to be cleared? Her expression didn't change. Cleared of what? The question hung there, unanswerable. That evening, networks replayed the footage again, this time with slow-motion breakdowns and expert commentary. Social media filled with declarations of support, outrage redirected, alliances revised. Politicians who had once condemned her now spoke of systemic lessons and the importance of patience. Someone printed her image, mid-throw, hair in motion, eyes steady, on a protest poster. Someone else made it a meme. Her act, stripped of context, commodified for causes that hadn't stood beside her. Vindication had arrived, but it came wrapped in exhaustion. Officer Harlan appeared only once after the leak, a grainy photo outside his house, face half hidden. The department released a statement. Policy review in process. No apology. No admission. Just a timestamp of its own, 3:02 p.m., the time the statement went live. Every second documented. Every second late, Nia stayed away from interviews. She refused talk shows, op-eds, awards. Truth didn't need translation anymore. Instead, She visited the courthouse steps one last time. The air smelled of dust and wet stone. The shoes were still there, lines of them, silent witnesses to the months gone by. She knelt, pulled her own pair from the end of the row, the same black flats she'd worn the day she stood in defiance. They were stiff now, faded. She held them for a long moment. Then she placed them back where they'd been, perfectly aligned. The gesture wasn't surrender. It was continuity. As she walked away, traffic hummed in the distance, blending with the faint echo of rain on glass. The timestamp from the footage replayed in her mind, 10:47:12. A mark of truth delayed. Not denied, it wasn't justice, not really. But it was something solid in a world built from shadows and reports. The clock on the courthouse tower struck the hour. Each chime carried the same message over and over, as if the building itself were finally learning how to speak. Too late, but seen. The courthouse had not changed. Its walls still shone with the same indifferent polish. The fluorescent lights still hummed their sterile hymn to order. The metal detector still stood in the lobby, tall, rectangular, humming faintly, a sentinel of obedience. But something in the silence had shifted. When Nia Benton entered, the guards recognized her. Not from wanted posters or security memos, but from the weight of what she had already survived. Their eyes moved with her, not hostile now, not reverent either, simply aware. She walked slowly, her steps unhurried, as if measuring the distance between the woman she had been and the one she had become. The echo of her shoes returned to her like memory. Click, click, each sound a small declaration. Still here, the same belt buckle glinted as she approached the metal detector. She remembered the first time, the way her posture alone had set off suspicion, the way silence had filled the air like accusation. Now the same archway awaited, the same threshold between freedom and surveillance. A guard gestured. "Ma'am, step through, please." She did. No alarm. No clink of confiscated keys or trays of surrendered dignity. The machine, built to detect what was hidden, stayed silent. For a moment, it felt like the entire building held its breath. Inside the lobby, she paused beneath the harsh white lights. The walls were still lined with official notices. No recording devices. Court in session. All visitors subject to search. Language of control. Language of permanence. And yet, there was a faint tremor under the surface, the kind that comes after a structure has been struck and doesn't know yet whether it's cracked. At the far end of the hall stood a janitor with a mop. The same man from months ago, perhaps. His eyes met hers briefly, then lowered. He wrung the mop once, the water dark and still. Nia nodded to him, a quiet acknowledgement of shared endurance. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But between them passed an understanding that institutions could clean floors, not histories. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, the long marble corridor that had led her once toward humiliation and noise. Today it was empty. The air smelled faintly of polish and memory. The courtroom doors were shut. She didn't open them. There was no need. What had happened there had already escaped the walls. It lived now in footage, in protests, in the ungoverned spaces of people's minds. She reached the window at the end of the hall and looked out. From this height, she could see the plaza below, the courthouse steps still stained faintly where the shoes had once stood in rows. Rain had washed away most of the marks, but not all. Some outlines remained, darker patches on the stone, like ghost footprints aligned toward justice. They would fade, perhaps. Everything fades, but not yet. Behind her, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A woman stepped out, young, nervous, holding a folder tight against her chest. Their eyes met briefly. "First time?" Nia asked. The woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am, testifying." Nia's gaze softened. "Take your time when you speak." The woman frowned slightly, unsure. "You've been here before?" Nia almost smiled, long enough to know what silence can do. The woman hesitated, then said quietly, "They said your case changed things." Nia shook her head. "No, it showed what was already broken." A pause. Then she added, "But cracks let the light in." The woman looked down at her folder, then back up. Her shoulders straightened just slightly. When she walked past the metal detector, she didn't bow her head. Nia descended the staircase, her hand brushing along the cool rail. The lobby's hum had changed, less mechanical, more human. The same guards now watched her go with eyes that held uncertainty, maybe even respect. One of them, a young officer, spoke. "Ma'am," he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I saw the video. It shouldn't have happened." Nia stopped but didn't turn. She simply said, "Then make sure it doesn't again." The officer nodded, though she didn't see it. Outside, the air was pale and cold. The city moved as it always had. Sirens in the distance, buses grinding against curbs, people crossing streets without looking up. But on the courthouse steps, someone had left a single pair of shoes, small, scuffed, facing the doors. Nia stood before them for a long time. She didn't know whose they were, or whether they were meant for her. But they carried the same message the silence once had: witness, endurance, refusal to vanish. She reached down, straightened the pair slightly, aligning them with precision. Then she stepped back, hands at her sides, eyes steady on the building. The courthouse loomed, same height, same marble, same weight of history pressing outward through its walls. But within its echoes, something else had begun, a subtle, living awareness. That silence could judge, that stillness could accuse, that truth, even delayed, could outlast procedure. The metal detector hummed behind her, the same sound as before, now transformed. It no longer marked danger. It marked passage. Nia turned away and walked down the steps, her figure small against the vast facade of stone. Her reflection flickered briefly in the glass doors before dissolving in the daylight. The silence followed her, not empty, but full. Not submission, but endurance. And as she stepped onto the street, the courthouse stood behind her like a monument to everything the system had tried to contain and failed to understand. That dignity, once awakened, does not pass through metal. It passes through time.